One of the spiritual works of mercy is to bear wrongs patiently. And all of us have an occasion to do this, because unless you're a hermit who is living off by themselves with absolutely no interaction with any other human being, in that case you have to bear wrongs that you do to yourself patiently, all of us come into conflict with each other, because that's what it is to be in a relationship, is to have to be patient with other people. Now here's the crazy thing about this. When it comes to being patient, one of the first things I have to do, and when it comes to being patient with bearing others' behavior towards myself, wrongs patiently, one of the first things it's important to understand is, if my goal is to change the person, then I have the wrong goal, and I'm never going to be able to be patient with them. And I find so often that couples who are newly married are far more patient with each other than couples who have been married for 20 or 30 years. That seems to be so opposite, because you think that after 20 or 30 years, you'd know your spouse well enough to know that, like, no, this is what they struggle with. They don't put the toilet seat down, or they don't clean up after themselves, or they don't hear me the first time I ask them to do the thing. You think that after 20 or 30 years that you would realize, oh, that's who they are. One of the first steps in being patient with someone else is to accept not only their strengths, but also their weaknesses. To accept the fact that, yeah, no, this is something they struggle with. They don't always listen to me when I ask them to do something. And so I have to ask them twice. I learned that about a person now. Now, if I'm not willing to be patient with them, I'll only want to change them. And if I just want to change them, then I'll be constantly frustrated. And it's impossible to be patient when you're frustrated. When you're angry at the situation, you become angry at the person. So one of the things you have to do, if we're going to be willing to bear wrongs patiently, is to be willing to learn what it is to be patient. And one of the things that is involved in being patient is being willing to accept a person for who and for what they are. After I accept them, I can now understand them. If I don't accept them, if I'm just interested in fixing them, I'll never try to understand where are they coming from, what's their perspective, why did they just behave that way. But if I accept someone, okay, this is the reality, this is how this relationship goes, this is how they interact with me, then now I can say, okay, now, why did they do what they do? Why do they act how they act? And I can start to understand, okay, where they're coming from, what they're looking for, why they said that or why they did that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with me. It may have to do with their weaknesses. It may have to do with their own wounds. Now, here's the last thing. To accept and to understand is not the same thing as condoning. So just to accept that this is someone's weakness, and this is just to understand this is where it's coming from, that doesn't mean that everything they do then is completely acceptable or condonable. But it does mean that I don't have to be anxious, I don't have to be frustrated, I don't have to be angry at them for doing something wrong. I can now accept, understand, and bear those wrongs with patience.